Yo, I got a 2012 Malibu back in here. This thing had some timing chain issues at all. One of the guides came apart and it pretty much wrecked the whole engine. So I got another one I'm going to put in it. Ecotec. I made sure it had the same VIN code too, the 8th digit of the VIN number. I made sure it was VIN code U because that way I know I'm not going to have to swap out a bunch of parts, and all the sensors and the injectors and the manifolds and everything should be identical. First thing I want to do is disconnect the negative terminal. That battery's junk because it's been sitting for too long, so I got to replace it anyways. And I got to get this top cover off. There's a clamp here, and you can look down in this hole here. And there's a clamp down there. You can get at it with a long screwdriver and take that oil fill cap off, and this thing pops out. I'm going to drain the coolant out of the radiator because I don't want to make a big mess. This cover's in my way, so I'm going to take this off. I think these are supposed to be a 7mm, but they're all rusted out, so I'm using a 9/32. Looks like it's missing a plastic clip over here. There's one on the other side. I just need to pull the center of it out. Then there's a screwy little thing right here on the bottom right-hand corner of the radiator. I can just get a pair of pliers and turn this loose, and it should dribble out of a hole on the bottom. And there it goes. I'll loosen up the radiator cap so it drains a little faster. Might as well drain the oil out of the thing. See how juicy this stuff looks. Looks like I got a 15mm on this. Should be some nice chunks in here, some timing guide components. I drained all of the coolant out of the radiator and closed that valve back off. And now on the back side of the engine, on the passenger side, this is the back side of the water pump. You can see this pipe right here that goes to the thermostat. And there's a drain right here that's a 13mm. I'm gonna loosen that up and take it out. There is some sealant on this thread because it's not tapered pipe or anything, so it might come out kind of hard. I'm just using a swivel socket. If you want to seal this back up, I can just take a little brake cleaner and get the ethylene glycol off of it. Do this a couple of times. 3 is usually a charm. Then I got PTFE liquid tape. Put a little bit of that on here. And I'm going to put some thread sealant on it too. Just a couple of wraps. A little insurance. Put it on there nice and tight so it gets pulled into the grooves. That should be fine. That'll seal. Now that this engine's completely drained out of coolant, I can put this plug back in. I would say this plug gets torqued to about 18 foot-pounds. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't need to. Since I'm underneath the car, on the front of the engine, there's the starter. There's a little clip on the top of this purple wire. You just pull up on that clip. You can pop that out. 13mm on this positive terminal. There should be two 15mm holding this in. One there, and then one up on top. You can't really see it, but I can feel my way around and get at the thing. Now on the passenger side wheel well, there's a bunch of clippy things I'm going to have to take off so I can get at the crankshaft. I'm just going to use a bungee cord and bend this out of the way. That way I can put a 21mm ratcheting wrench on this thing so I can turn the engine. Now I'm back to the starter hole. I got 3 18mm bolts I can get at. It's not real critical now, but when I go put this engine in, I got to make sure that those don't fall down in here, because if they do, I'm going to have a big problem. Now if you get them all, I should be able to turn the crankshaft and the flywheel will turn and the torque converter will stay in one place. That way I know I got them all. And then I'm going to want to take a screwdriver or something and I'm going to want to push this torque converter in as far as it'll go, which is not very far at all. It's floating in there though. I got a couple connectors down here I can unplug. This looks like a crankshaft sensor. Push in a tab right here. And this should come out. That's probably an oil sensor. This is a NOx sensor. There's a tab on that you can push in here. I have a ground that looks to be a 15 millimeter air conditioning pump. There's a connector on here. There's a 13 millimeter on this. Looks like this compressor's leaking. There's dye oil all over the place. Now on the top side, I have to get this stud off of this AC compressor. I still got the belt on here. I got a 13 millimeter nut on here. That nut's loose. There's a hex on the end of this stud. It's either a 5 millimeter or a 3/16. I'm going to take the stud out. Now I should have one more bolt on this air conditioning compressor. Now I should be able to get this belt off of here. And then I can just flop this out of the way. That way I don't have to discharge the air conditioning and take this pipe off. Now I have a couple of wires for the alternator. I think I'm going to leave the alternator on when I take this engine out. The field wire here. And then I have a 13 millimeter charge wire. Take that off. And this little wire, that goes to the starter. I'm going to try to find a way to bungee cord this compressor out of my way. That should be fine, just like that. I got a little wiry clippy thing right here. Disconnect that. I have a down pipe here with a catalytic converter on it that I'm going to have to deal with. These are supposed to be 13 millimeters, but they're rusted out a little bit, so a 12 millimeter fits. I'm not just going to go hammering on the thing either. I'm going to get these glowing red to take them off to make sure they don't break. So I don't want to have any problems with broken studs. I'm just using some map gas. Basically, you get it over like 500 degrees. It's usually pretty good. Exhaust hanger here, 15 millimeter. I have an oxygen sensor here I'm going to unplug. Passenger side axle is bolted into the engine. It's a 13 millimeter here. I'm just going to loosen this up so I can get at this bolt. 3 15 millimeters on this. Well, that's nice and loose. It's not pinned or anything like a lot of Japanese or European cars. I could probably take all 3 of these bolts out just so I could slide this out of the way. Yeah, that's nice. That shouldn't cause me any problems when it comes time to install this thing. Okay, on top side now, there's a whole bunch of child-proof connectors and all these connectors. They're like gray tabs. You just got to pull back on them. And then you can push down on this, pull these out. I got a whole bunch of these. A lot of them I already unplugged from when I was diagnosing this thing. I'm just going to unplug as many of these as I can. This wire loom is all crusty and corroded off. I'll be able to get that out of the way. Like so. There's a plug here for the fuel injectors. And looks like a map sensor too. I can just leave this plugged into the engine. Got a wire for the fan down here, the cooling fan. I can get all these wires out of the way. This air box has got to go. See a 10 millimeter here for that. Some goofy plastic connector for this AC hose on here. Upper radiator hose. Looks like I found another reason to use a bungee cord. Coolant hose here. There's a little gray tab you can push in on this evap filter thing, and that pops off. Connector for that. This little metal clip, don't want to lose that. That's like a safety clip for this fuel line. I got one of these 3/8 inch jobbies that goes up in here. You'll hear it click. You can pull this fuel line off. It might have pressure, might squirt all over you. Should be 2 camshaft sensors on the end of this block. There's one in the front for the intake and one in the rear for the exhaust. There's a vacuum line here for the power brakes. I'm going to take that off of the throttle body. Now on this side of the engine, I have a couple of grounds on the front and the rear of the engine. Looks like I have 4 radiator and heater hoses here I got to take off. This one I'm going to take off from the reservoir side because the clamp's in a goofy spot. In fact, it looks easy enough. I'm just going to take this whole reservoir off with a couple of 10 millimeters. I got all those hoses. Looks like I got a coolant temp sender wire here and oxygen sensor. I have 18 millimeter bell housing bolts going around the engine. Since I'm up here, I might as well get these 2 on the top out now. I have an oxygen sensor on the back of this exhaust manifold. I'm going to take that off with an oxygen sensor wrench. Looks like it might get in my way. Looks like I have 3 10 millimeters on this exhaust manifold cover. One of them's missing. I have 3 15 millimeter nuts on this catalytic converter that's on this downpipe. They don't look all corroded or anything, so they should come off really nice. The converter hit the ground. Now I'm back underneath the car. Got a couple 15 millimeters here for this exhaust bracket. I got a bracket going from the transmission to the engine. 15 millimeter there. 18 millimeter here. Then I got some bell housing bolts here. 18 millimeters. One there and one way up here. Right underneath the thermostat housing. Working my way around, I got 3 15 millimeters here. This one's got some goofy metal bracket on it. Working my way to the front, I have 2 more 18 millimeters, and that should be all of the bell housing bolts. I'm just being a little brave here because I still have the front mount that I got to take off. So this engine shouldn't fall out or anything yet. And I definitely have all of them because it just separated from the transmission. I have the engine supported with a cherry picker now. I have a few bolts on the front engine mount left. That should be all I have left. There's 2 18 millimeter bolts here. 3 more 15 millimeters. This mount can come out. With any luck, this engine will come out. I just need to separate it from the transmission. Make sure that torque converter doesn't come out with it. Get a little better money shot of what I'm doing. One thing I want to do, I can get my finger back here and I can tell there's about a 1/4 inch gap in between the torque converter and the back side of the transmission. I just want to check that and make sure that this torque converter didn't come out. So that's good. About the only thing I had to swap out on this thing was the alternator. Everything else is pretty much on this engine. The guy did a really good job pulling this out. I put a strap right here on the one corner just so I could pull up one corner and get it all nice and square so it's level straight across and it's not tipped. I think the only thing I want to point out, all these torque specs are crazy on this thing. They're all over the place. So I'm just going to say this. The 6x1 millimeters, I'm going to do at 9 foot-pounds or 108 inch-pounds. And then the next step up would be 8x125s. Those I'm going to do at about 18 to 23 foot-pounds. And then we got 10x15 bolts that I'm going to do at 33 foot-pounds. And then these big bell housing bolts, there's a couple on the mounts too. These are 12x175. I'm going to do those at 55 foot-pounds. And then these torque converter bolts, there's 3 of those for the torque converter. I'm going to put blue Loctite on those and do those at 46 foot-pounds. And then these exhaust manifold to pipe bolts I'm going to do at 46 foot-pounds too. And that's pretty much, you know, I'm just going to slam it together, and that's as technical as I'm going to get. Looks like I have the strap in the wrong location. I think I got to go the other way. I got those pins lined up now. I'm just going to tighten up one bell housing bolt now that those pins are lined up. Now I can put this engine mount in. And it's in there. Now I'm just going to do everything from underneath that I need to do, and then I'll work on the stuff on the top. I got a whole bunch of stuff underneath the car all bolted together. I got to put this exhaust on now, this downpipe with the catalytic converter. There's an O-ring gasket right here and a gasket here. None of it's ripped or torn or anything. So I'm not going to waste any money buying new gaskets, and I'm going to use this stuff. I really like this junk. You get it at Napa. I think you can get it other places too. It avoids comebacks. Yeah, believe that. So if you use this stuff as much as I do, that's how you cheap things out. In case you're wondering about this serpentine belt tensioner, it can be gotten with a 3/8 ratchet. There's a little square on it. Everything's coming along pretty good. I got to change the filter and put new oil in this thing. I made this long before you could ever buy one when these engines first came out. This was like an 1.25 inch socket I made it out of. I think it's a 32 millimeter. There's actually an oil filter socket you can buy for these. It says right on here too, 25 Newton meters. You don't want to get these too tight, because if you do, you're going to have a problem. They don't really need to be that tight either, because there's a seal on the cap that seals this filter, so it doesn't really need to be too tight. This O-ring, just pop this out. I can replace this O-ring because there's one in the box with the filter. Stick the filter in here. It should snap in somehow. You can feel a little spring in there too. And it's ready for 5 quarts of oil. I have the new battery. I put oil in it. And I put this cover on it because it needs to read a mass airflow sensor. Haven't put coolant in it yet. I'm going to start it and make sure it runs. Make sure the check engine light doesn't come on. And see if I didn't do something stupid. Wow, that sounds great. Once again, I really don't have anything bad to say about Chevrolet just because they built the car where I could put an engine in it and it wasn't a total pain in my keister. It was actually a complaint-free job. Okay, bye.